Hi, everyone. Welcome to our very first panel discussion organized by the NAASC Early Career Subcommittee. And our today's panel discussion is about how to getting started as a group leader. I'm Arif Ashraf. I'm a postdoc with Michelle Fassett at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And also I'm part of the Early Career Subcommittee from the NAASC. So in our today's panel discussion for this 1 hour, I'll be a co-host, and also with us, we have two other co-hosts. So at this point, I'm going to pass it to Luis to introduce himself as a moderator and also to introduce our today's panelist.
Hello, everybody. I'm Luis de Luna. I'm a postdoc at the University of California, Riverside, and I'm going to be moderating the panel today. I'm super excited to have the opportunity to participate in this event today and, be part of this because we usually don't have them enough. And let's face it, we all need guidance when it comes to navigating academia, especially when we're just getting started, right? So today we have an amazing panel of people that started their labs fairly recently. We have Dr. Carlos Ortiz. We also have Dr. Chopin and Dr. Aman husbands, and they'll be learning about starting their own labs. So without further ado, let's start with the round of introductions. Let's kick it off with Carlos. Go ahead, please.
Hi everyone, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to this very nice panel. I just started my lab like 3 years ago in Mexico in Cinvestav, which is a federal institution located in central Mexico. And I am working on developmental biology, especially on plants, but now we are doing actually some things in humans as well. And I specialize in single cell sequencing and transcriptome profiling of like specific cell types and specific tissues. And I guess the main question of my lab is how new cell types evolve from previous cell types, and how you start to get this complexity. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Sure.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Xue Pan. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Toronto, Scarborough. So I started my position last year, September, and my lab focused on plant lipid biosynthesis modifications and signaling with the goal of developing innovative strategies to improve crop yield and bio-oil qualities. And thank you very much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you. Aman?
Hi, thanks again for the invitation. My name is Aman Husbands. I guess I have my lab for the longest. I started in 2018 at Ohio State, and then I got recruited to Penn in 2021. And so I started the lab again in January of 2022. So I can tell you how to start a lab once and maybe even twice if need be. So I'm also a developmental biologist. So we're sort of interested in, how do you get these complex, beautiful shapes, and why doesn't that go wrong all the time, right? Complexity and reproducibility. And so we work with an ancient family of transcription factors that binds to lipids. So that's very cool, Shreya. I like that. Yeah. And then we work with flat leaf architecture as a sort of really difficult biological problem that plants have figured out how to solve. And we're using that as a system to look at underlying mechanisms of developmental reproducibility. So that's the lab in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks to today's panelists for joining us today. So as Luis mentioned, that this is a good opportunity for all of us who needs guidance and thinking about our future career to get some idea for how it feels like to start as a group leader. So I will briefly tell you about the format of today's panel discussion, which is going to be for an hour. So we have a series of questions which we actually got when you are registering for this event. So both Luis and I'm going to ask this question to this panelist. At the same time, when you have a question in your mind, just feel free to put into the chat. So our other member for the Early Career Subcommittee, Margot, is actually looking to those questions and directing to us. And we're going to ask those questions to our panelists as well. So with this, I'm actually just giving it to Luis to start with the very first question. I'm really excited about today's discussion.
All right. So first thing first, right? How long did it take you to fully set up your lab from day one with only empty benches to a fully functional workplace, like producing results? Let's go, Shweta.
Yeah, sure. So I think my situation might be somewhat different. So my lab is actually still undergoing the renovation, but I was given the access to a recently retired faculty's lab, which is just right next to my own lab. And our lab belongs to an open lab space with many shared equipment and resources. So I didn't really actually start with an empty bench, but it still took me about like 4 months to get the initial results because it took time to really get familiarized with the ordering system and the financial system, and then set up the lab account, and then also there's waiting time for some other equipment and the reagent to arrive. And then so the overall time is about like 4 months, but I wouldn't say my lab is fully functional just yet, but it's getting there.
Yeah, I get it. Aman?
Yeah, that sounds about right, actually. That's a terrifying feeling, by the way, when you like go in there and there's just nothing set up. It's that's wild. Yeah, I would say basically 3 months before we were reliably doing PCR and cloning, just simple things, you know, and then our more complex chip experiments were probably closer to 5 to 6 months, I would say. It takes a while, right? Because part of that is hiring, getting people to rotate through, having the hands to really do it, unless you want to be at the bench yourself, which has a separate set of challenges. But I would say 4 to 6 months. And even Penn. So when I moved here, I came with a grad student and a postdoc, which was unbelievably helpful to have people come with you. It's a huge change. Even then, it was basically 3 months, I would say. So it just takes time.
Yeah.
How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, actually, probably my situation it's also specific because I arrived at Langevio like 2 weeks before the pandemic started. So I was hired like 1 month before, and then I started working here 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, right? So the institute was closed completely, so we couldn't access the labs and we couldn't access any facilities like for 7 months. So there was nothing you can do, right, for that amount of time. So that was really challenging, and it was like you have to deal with this anxiety of wanting to start your lab, and you have to be basically sitting in your home and having virtual meetings, right? But once the institute was open again, I think it took me like, I would say probably 6 to 8 months just to have like enough students, enough equipment, and all the logistics working so that we can actually start producing some results, you know. So yeah, in total it was like 1.5 years, but I was arriving just in the middle of the pandemic, and here it was like completely closed. So that was hard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the next question is like, it looks like that we're going to talk about a lot of the challenges you face when you started your lab. So if we ask you like, what was the biggest challenges you faced when you started your lab, what and how you tackle that? So can we start with Aman?
Yeah, my PhD supervisor, Patty Springer, who is at UC Riverside, actually, I had just happened to mention this, like, I was like, what do you find the hardest part of your job? And she said that you get pulled in many different directions. And I now completely understand what she means by that. Because our job is now very multifaceted and different, and it requires different muscles every time, right? Teaching is very different than mentoring, which is different than research, like reading, staying up on papers versus writing manuscripts versus grant writing. It really is very different parts of your brain, and you kind of get those uninterrupted blocks of time that you had as a postdoc that I really miss. That's harder to come by, I would say. So that's the major part. That's one of them. I have another one, but I want to hear what the others say first.
How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like when you are a postdoc, you are used to focus on one single thing, which is your project and maybe a side project. And that's it, right? You have this tunnel vision of focusing on your project. What is the next experiment I need to do? How I need to write the manuscript, and you can just focus on that, and your PI takes care of everything else. And now you have to shift, right? And you have to manage people, you have to manage resources. you have to like learn to use your time efficiently, which is not something that it's always easy, right? So yeah, I think as Aman said, you get pulled on very different directions, and you have to learn to refocus on what is important for the lab sometimes.
How about you, Shil?
Yeah, I echo everything just said. So I think the biggest challenging for me so far is the time management and the priorities, because it does comes with like lots of responsibilities and the tasks. And I found it especially challenging when we have like simultaneously juggle like multiple responsibilities and tasks. That has been like one of the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, by listening this, I always heard these things from assistant professor. They said that the postdoc is the best time, that you don't have too many responsibilities, just do the research.
Right.
But it's
That's right.
it's a temporary position, though. I understand.
Exactly.
Being a postdoc too, right? So yeah, definitely. But one other thing I was going to say from like a personal standpoint is that the days they're this weird mix of like good and bad. Like you can have a day where you got a grant, which is great, and then your paper gets brutally rejected, which is terrible. So you're like at the end of the
Up
week,
and down the same day.
yeah, I don't know how to feel. You know, there's kind of a lot of this too. So that's something I'm still getting used to now.
Great.
Awesome.
So, I mean, since we have people from different institutions here, this is going to be like a good opportunity to learn about the institutional policies that are set up to like help you succeed. Can you identify like maybe a couple examples of this kind of policies? Let's start with Shwet.
Yeah, UTSC has been instrumental in helping me like grow and develop as a new faculty member. So like first and foremost, it provides like, I think similar to many research institutes and universities, it does provide the startup funds and the teaching relief. So like enable me to really focus on establish the research progress at the beginning. And also it also provides a lot of the professional development opportunities, such as workshops and seminars that can like provide essential trainings in teaching techniques, grant writings, and also the leadership development. And also the other thing is that UTSC also provide the internal funds, such as the professional academic coaching funds. So you can use this fund to seek the personalized support from professional coaches in area like how to maintain a healthy work and life balance, and also the career planning as well.
All right, Carlos.
So yeah, so here I also got a startup money, which helped a lot, and it's not common in Mexico. So that was lucky for me. It wasn't a huge amount of money, but just enough to start like doing the most basic experiments and buying reagents, and that's like that really helps a lot. When you arrive to a lab, like if you don't have anything, then it's really hard to wait until you get a grant, right? Then another thing that was very good for me was that the lab was almost fully equipped, so I didn't have to buy any of the basic equipment, and even reagents. I had a lot of reagents from before, right? So that helped a lot as well. And something else that happens here in Mexico, and it's not necessarily an institutional policy, but it's like everywhere in Mexico, is that you don't have to pay for students. Like students get scholarships automatically if they get into these highly regarded postgraduate programs. So that helps a lot because you can get students like pretty quickly, even if you don't have a lot of money. For me, I think that was the best thing that helped me to start the lab.
Yeah, that must be huge because that's a lot of what our startup goes towards. Actually, is salary. Yeah. Most of our money is salary. So that'd be really helpful. Yeah. Yeah. So for me, indeed, startup. That's true. So then you can prioritize what you want to buy. Startup is unrestricted money, which is great. So if you want to spend $100,000 on a microscope, you can do that. It's hard to do through NSF type mechanisms, through federal agencies. So startup is precious. Teaching relief, I agree. Ohio State was really, really good. This molecular genetics department, they took, I didn't teach at all the first year, And then the second year I taught 1/3 of a team taught class. And then finally the year after that was when I was teaching my full load, right? So they really gave you lots of time to develop that program and focus on research and writing grants and getting that done, right? So that was really helpful.
Awesome. So the next question is about how to get about the funding, which is related to you mentioned about the startup things. So once you start a lab, you have the idea that I want to do this, and then basically you need people, and you need to run your own people to the money and all the support. So how it feels like when you start the lab, how to managing the money, including startup and other things, and also hiring the people. Can we start with show?
Yeah, sure. So the first startup money I mainly used for like purchasing some like very essential equipment and the reagents to start with to jumpstart my research. And also part of that goes to like the hiring the initial personnel. That's mainly the graduate students. So I don't have any postdoc on board. And then so the students has been the key driving force behind the research progress in my lab. And also I've been actively applying for some of the research grants, which is specifically designed for the early career faculties in Canada. So that's my main strategy so far.
How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, for funding, right now it's hard in Mexico. There's not a lot of money for science. So basically my strategy was to apply to international funds. And luckily enough, I got one international fund, which was very, very helpful. And is what has maintained the lab for the last 3 years, right? Also, I think it's very important to have collaborations like outside your country. You know, for me, that was key because that enables you to apply to other grants or funding sources that you may not be able to apply by yourself, you know? So that was very important. And also sometimes these collaborations enables you to, for example, I took a student last year and we went to New York to do an experiment, and it was, I mean, they paid for the experiment because it was a collaboration, right? So especially if you are in these countries in which you don't have that huge resources going into science, I think that's very important.
Cool. I actually just came to know yesterday from Sunil that some of his students went to Can's lab. So we just recent information from me too. Awesome. How about you, Aman?
So the question is about funding. How do I think about getting funding?
Funding and people both at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get people that come with fellowships or something, that's always really helpful. But, you know, especially as a new PI, it is difficult to count on that. Often people with fellowships will go to sort of established labs. So yeah, that's what the startup is for. It's a capital investment in your small business, basically, right? And then you take that investment and then you generate data to get grants and papers and grants. That's the name of the game. And so I think where some people go wrong with grants is they really wait until it's absolutely perfect, but it will never be perfect, right? You just have to submit. You have to make a list of, you know, I'm going to try to send 3 or 4 grants out this year and just see what happens, right? So for NSF, for example, sometimes you can submit the exact same grant and it will, you know, get trashed, or people will love it, right? You could submit it 3 times in a row, talk to the program officer, and you get funded, right? Because maybe the panel didn't quite know what to do with it, but NSF likes it, you know, and I would never have known that. That actually just happened to me. That's why I'm saying that. I would never have known that if I just sort of sat with it and waited until it was absolutely perfect. It will never be perfect. You have to just submit. It's a bit of a lottery in some ways. So that's I don't know, maybe as scientists, we don't like the idea that, you know, something could actually, there could be this element of luck to a lot of this stuff, but that is true. And the more you write, the more ideas you have, the more likely you are to get funded. So just keep firing.
I have a follow-up question because I heard these 2 kind of thoughts. Like some people say that when they start the lab, okay, I didn't apply for external grant in my first year because I want to learn and see what works best for which agencies. Or sometimes they said, okay, I didn't wait. I just start from the very first couple of months. So in your case, what was the strategy?
Yeah, I started writing in the first year. So I was part of a grant writing group. That's another really key piece of advice, to link up with other assistant professors. If you have a senior member who is good at writing grants that can help you do that, that's really helpful. that forces you to write. And so by the end of the year, I was going to submit, and actually she's now my colleague, Kim Gallagher, was working for NSF. And
Nice.
she said, why don't you come and sit on a grant panel? And so I was like, great. So all my grant was almost done. It was the best grant you'd ever seen, obviously. Then I get to the grant panel and I was like, oh my God, in 15 minutes, people's grants go from, I thought it was amazing to low and not funded. It was a real eye-opening experience at that process. And you realize that your grant will never be perfect. Just do your best, submit and try. So I took it back. I did a whole bunch of work on it, retooled it, still didn't get funded. But we got funded later, right? It took a few years, but you get there. So I think you just have to submit. You have to just keep trying and try not to take it personally, which is very hard. Yeah.
Luis, are you going to skip the next question or should I go to my next question?
I can ask.
Okay.
So as leaders, you guys mentioned that you're now doing like a lot of different tasks that you were not doing before. So what's been the most difficult one and how do you manage it? And here I'm gonna mix it up with one of the audience questions. Guys use some kind of project management software or just rely on the good old pen and notebook? Let's start with Carlos.
Yeah, that's a good question. For me, the most difficult thing is, as you said already, I guess it's to manage people, to learn to go from being a scientist to a manager, right? I mean, you still do science, you are still a scientist, but a lot of your time goes into manage other people's time and other people and resources, right? And their projects as well. So that's hard because you have to learn how much you can push people, for example, right? Or how much you can give them advice into how they should do experiments, for example, or writing without being a micromanager, right? Because this is always like something that you are in danger of becoming. Like you want people to succeed, and you want them to succeed so badly that you want to almost tell them how to do the experiments, with like almost take their hands and do the experiments, right? And you have to avoid doing that because that's something that doesn't work and makes people feel very uncomfortable. So hitting that sweet spot in which you are a good manager and a good mentor, but still giving people space and still let them be creative and curious, that's hard. And I think there's no way to learn that beforehand. You just have to learn it with experience, But regarding the other part of the question, I don't use any software, so it's just like a notebook and pen. I have meetings every week with my students, and we go through everything they are doing and every questions they have, and communication is very important. I mean, I could say more stuff, but yeah, I want to hear what others want to say.
All
right, thank you. Aman?
Yeah, no project management software either. I agree. Maybe that's a good idea. Have like your bulleted list of things. Keep an eye on your projects. Every project should have an outline and where you are in that progress. Your job as the PI is basically vision and timeline, right? Where are we going and are we on track to get there? So that's your job, is to keep an eye on that timeline. And that just happens indeed through communication. I totally agree with Carlos. That's exactly right. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
What was
challenge? A major challenge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This leadership thing is really hard. I mean, hiring is very difficult. Hiring is always challenging to know if this is the type of person who you will work well with and will fit in your lab culture, which is incredibly important. That's like an ecosystem that has to be very carefully maintained. So to know that from hiring, that's a major challenge, and that's leadership. So Carlos is totally right. I mean, I think you'll never learn it ahead of time, but if you just think about it a lot, I think about it a lot. Like, it keeps me up. Making sure that people can stay employed is a major source of anxiety for me. So, but I think if you're conscious about it and really think about it, then you're already ahead of a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. All right, sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. But then in addition to the hiring and also the mentoring part, I think the other very challenging thing for me is the administrative task. So that's something I really have very limited experience before, and found that quite overwhelming at the beginning, because I was really taken back by the amount of time, the efforts I put into the paperwork involving start running a lab. And then so the way I manage that is actually by seeking out help for more experienced faculties and staff in the university. And then they have been very generously sharing their tips and advice, and even the grant applications and also the budgets. So that has been I think that it's very important at the beginning just to seek out for help and just ask lots of questions. Yeah. And in terms of the project management software, actually, I don't have any yet, but I definitely thinking of trying different things and then finding out the proper way for the project management. Yeah.
Cool. So the next question is about when you start a lab, you learn so many new information, which is kind of surprising to you. Okay, I have to budget this, or I have to take care of this and these official things. When you started, what was the kind of very surprising thing to you that you never thought about before? You come to know, you joined the department, you started a lab, and you come to know. What was the most surprising thing for you to know? Can we start with Aman?
Oh, as Trey said, the last question, administration. It is insane. I'm really good at pipetting at the bench. I can do that. But why do I need to know ordering software and how to do all these aspects of HR and these things that I have just no skill set with, that you then need to sort of learn, in addition to the mentoring side of things, which is good. I mean, you should do that. I have some experience with mentoring because I would have mentored an undergrad or something, right? So some of this, I have some training that you just have to then scale up. But a lot of this, wow, yeah, I had no idea what it takes to get into the amount of administration that comes with that. And just these little small things that you have to kind of keep track of, and then somehow find time to do science as well, if possible. So that was I was very surprised at that, actually. Yeah.
Interesting. Can you go to the show?
Yeah, I just totally agree. Yeah, the complexity of the administrative task is something really surprised me as well.
How about you, Carlos?
Yeah, I think it's similar. It's the amount of non-scientific things that you have to do. You don't expect this. Even they tell you before, look, there's going to be a lot of administration that you will have to handle. It's still a surprise that how many non-scientific things you have to do. And sometimes even, dealing with politics and bureaucracy, it's really hard. And we were talking about this actually before starting, that one of the main advices my previous supervisor gave me was say no as much as possible, especially when you start your own lab, because people will always want you to give more classes or do more administrative stuff or be in charge of this or that committee. And this will take time from your actual stuff that you have to do, right? From your actual research. So try to say no as much as possible, especially when you start, and use that time to set up your research lines. And that's actually very hard. You want to say yes to everything. That's especially when you start, you really want to be okay with everybody, right? And you want to say yes. But I think that's something very important, and that was a very good advice for me.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Your disadvantage reminds me of a book I read a long time back. It's called Never Say Yes When You Want to Say.
Exactly. Yeah, for example, we were saying the only thing that doesn't have a deadline is writing manuscripts, right? So for me, that was also something very surprising, that it's very hard to find time to write a manuscript. Now we have all the stuff, all the information and all the data that we need to write a manuscript. And it's very hard for me to find time to do it because everything else has a deadline and a priority, so that creates anxiety.
Yeah. So one strategy, I like that. One strategy I've been trying to do, people would ask, what does an average day look like for you as a PI? And there is no average day. And I think the reason is all these little individual tasks. So instead we have
Right.
seasons basically, right? So my spring is my teaching season. So I have 2 classes that I teach. And if I can get anything else done in spring besides that, I'm ahead. That's what I tell myself. Then I have summer and fall, which will be going to conferences, seminars or something like that, and then writing the manuscripts and grants. So that's sort of that season. So the year basically breaks down into these seasons, right? And then so for manuscript time would come summer for me. I would be like, okay, no more procrastinating. You now have the time. This is the time to get that done. But I had to budget that in. So I'm trying not to be anxious in spring because I know that I've given myself that block of time in the summer and fall. I'm trying to sort of budget it that way. I found that a little bit helpful. And then, yeah, at the end of when December hits, then I know we start it all over again, you know, time to start teaching. Yeah.
Awesome. Lucy can go for the next question.
Yeah, so now that we've been talking a little bit about mentoring, what is your approach to mentoring? Carlos?
Yeah, that's a really hard question because it involves a lot of things. But I guess I see mentoring as a way of helping students to achieve their goals and to maximize their potential, right? And that's hard because their goals are not always the same goals you have when you were a student, right? Some of them want to stay in the academia, or some of them want to go to industry, or some of them, they just want to get the degree and that's it, right? So it's not the same goals that you had. So you have to understand what goals they have and just help them achieve that, you know, and what is the most efficient and most direct way of helping them get in there. Yeah, I think for me, that's the way I see it. And you are not going to change people, right? So that's another thing that you learn. Some students will improve a lot, some students will not improve a lot. So you just are there to push them and to take off obstacles from their path, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. How about you, Shua?
I think my mentoring approach is just trying to build a very supportive and inclusive environment where my mentees can feel very comfortable for sharing their goals, concerns, and also challenges. So I think I totally agree with Carlos, like every mentees are very unique. So I think like the training approach really has to tailor to meet individual needs and aspirations. So I just hope like my lab I will try the best to provide the skills and also training opportunities to really help them to achieve their career goals. That's the approach.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah, my lab ethos is a supportive and collaborative environment. That's what I say. Yeah. We make it or we don't make it, right? And so people will get on each other's papers. Everybody has a main project that they'll be first author that they drive. But if someone can help you and get on there, that's what we do, right? So so I find that that's nice. Individualized mentoring is 100% true. So I've had a grad student who was thinking much more industry. So we set him up with projects that will give him a broad set of skills from bioinformatics to working with cancer cell lines, actually, that would make him competitive for that. My other student is more interested in teaching. So she was TAing for me. She helped me develop a whole new class here at Penn. She has more experience now than I did like 3 years into being a professor. Like, it's amazing. But, you know, in both cases, they are both pushing the lab agenda forward. They're both doing a bunch of work that we need. We're going to get papers out of all that and preliminary data for grants, right? So everybody's on the same team, but the type of mentoring, can be different depending on the student. And I agree, it is hard to not project yourself onto them, but it's their life. They can do whatever they want with it, you know?
Yeah, thank you. So, like a little bit of follow-up question. So how do you guys manage your own career goals with your students' career goals? How do you balance these two that, as you guys mentioned, can be somewhat opposing at times or different? Aman, yeah.
Yeah, I don't see them as opposing, actually. I think fair point. I mean, for example, if somebody wants to teach and they want to TA all the time, that would take them out of the lab. I think that's true. So there's a way to negotiate that. But in general, I actually don't see those things in conflict at all. I think at the end of it, we want a well-trained student who has, helped the lab forward, right? My first responsibility is to the lab. That's what I say, everybody that's in it and the people that come after it. So as long as we're all pulling in that direction, I don't see those things in conflict, actually. I don't. I think it's okay.
That's
Or
fair.
maybe, yeah.
How about Shre?
Yeah, I don't see that as a conflict either. So, and also like at the initial recruitments, right? I think one of the essential things also like you need to hire, like invite someone to join the lab when they have like the same research interest, like at least align with your lab focus. I think like that can like be a foundation where your incentives will meet with their incentives. So I think that for the initial recruitment stage, you already like set the foundation for the lab members in your lab.
Yeah. Okay, Carlos.
Yeah, I think in general, I don't see it as a conflict either, but sometimes there's a little bit of mismatches, right, that develop along the way. I try to give them a project that is just for themselves, right, and then another objective that is common to the lab, and that we can use it to build something between all the projects or a bigger project for a manuscript, for example. So they have like the two options, but sometimes along the way, they get a new interest, right? And they discover something new that was not planned before in the initial objectives, and they want to go and chase that, right? And I think you have to be open to that, right? Sometimes you have a very fixed idea of what you are gonna get out of the project, but it's actually not your project anymore, it's their project. And of course you have to get something out for the lab, but you also need to give them some freedom. And sometimes there's these mismatches and you just have to be a little bit open and let them explore. And sometimes that's very good. Like you get a new research line, like this happened to me before. Like I was like at the beginning, very focused on getting from A to B and get that guy to get from A to B, right? And then he discovered something else. And I was at the beginning very reluctant, but then I tried to relax, and then it actually became a new research line for the lab. So that I think that's also something that you need to be open about.
Awesome. So as we're talking a lot about the people, whether their goal aligned with your goal and so many of these things. So how you initially actually hired those people? Because we oftentimes heard these stories, oh, I'm not finding postdocs, or I'm not finding good graduate students, or sometimes it is opposite, that I got too many CVs, I cannot narrow down. So what is your like hiring strategy that, okay, this is the person I want to get in my lab? Can we start with you, Carlos?
Right. For me, the most important, I mean, I haven't gotten to the point in which I have a ton of CVs that I have to filter. But my strategy so far is just find out how much curiosity they have and how much passion they have for the research questions that you also have, right? I mean, you can prepare, sometimes they prepare for an interview with you and they read what you have done. And you can see that they read and that they know, the background, but the passion is not there, right? And that's very difficult to fake. So for me, that's something that when you talk to them, obviously you have to talk to them a lot before hiring. When you talk to them, you have to see this passion, right? And this curiosity. And if they propose like, this is interesting, and what about if we do this other experiment, right? If they start like proposing or thinking in new experiments that they will like to do on top of your research lines, so that tells you that there is passion, right? And for me, that's like the most important thing when I hire someone.
Awesome. Can you go to you, Shre?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a very big challenging to really find someone who not only really have like necessary skills, but also like fits well to your lab culture and the goals. It's not an easy task, but I do consider like many factors. So like first and foremost, as mentioned, is like the research interest that needs to be aligned with the lab focus. And then because I want to make sure my lab can really provide the essential trainings they're looking for. And also like additionally also assess, like, for example, the academic backgrounds and qualifications, and also the commitment and enthusiasm, like just based on like application materials and reference letter, and also the interviews. And then they also like have to assess like additional factors such as like the gender balance and the cultural diversity when I make my selection, like the final decisions as well. Yeah.
Cool. What is your hiring policy, Aman?
Oh yeah, it's true. I agree with that completely. I would say the two major things you can't are ones you can't teach. So I agree with initiative and enthusiasm. That this is somebody who really wants to be there. You can't teach somebody you want to do that. They feel it or they don't, right?
Yeah.
And then kindness and a collaborative nature, right? If my lab is a supportive, collaborative environment, that has to be an ethos that you really agree with and really share. And I can teach you everything else. I could teach you how to be great at the bench. I'll teach you how to write, all of these things. I can teach you all of those skills. That's no problem. But I can't, I teach you to be someone who wants to, kind, and someone who wants to communicate, and makes the lab a great place to be when you're there, like all of that. Yeah, you have it or you don't, so that's the type of place that I want to build. I'm not saying it's the only place, but those to me. And how do you do that? That's challenging. So early on, I got lucky. I had a great technician, and then the two of us sort of, had brought in grad students, and we're just able to create that environment by attracting other people. Now people will rotate through the lab, and then I'll ask my group, like, what did you guys think? You know who the lab is, how do they fit? And I have, their input is huge. They say, I don't like this person. I'm not hiring that person even if they have 5 cell papers, you know what I mean? Because that will destroy that ecosystem.
Right.
So that's just a short-term gain for long-term pain. So yeah, initiative and kindness.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? Like, where do we advertise, and where do you think the best place to advertise the lab openings or positions?
I've gotten a lot of grad students. I actually really like a grad student heavy lab. I find that works for me. I have not advertised for a postdoc. I gave some seminars, and I bumped into someone in UT Knoxville, and we had a great conversation, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to be finishing my PhD. Maybe I could come to your lab. So he came, he gave a seminar. Everybody liked him. He's exactly the type of thing I'm talking about. So he's going to start here soon in July, which is great. Yeah.
Is there anything sure you want to add, like how you advertise? I really like your lab website. It's very well organized about people and all the direction.
Yeah. So the other channel, I think, is also through teaching, because I'm teaching the class and it's a plant physiology. So the most students enroll in the class already have strong interest about plant biology. So I always trying to introduce open positions in the class, and also try to share some the ads with other colleagues so they can introduce the openings to their classes as well. So that's another way I was introducing openings.
I heard the same thing from my current postdoc advisor. She can exactly tell, oh, this undergrad was very good, and he or she sits over there in my class. Yeah, very good. I can recruit him or her.
Yeah, awesome. And also during the teaching, you get familiar with the students, and you know how active they are, and whether they're really interested about the contents.
Do you want to add anything about advertisement policy, Carlos?
Yeah, for me the best way to advertise is, as Sue said, just to give classes. But in my case, I try to give at least one of these common courses, right? Like we have these common courses that are for everyone. So you get into one of them, and then all the students see you, right, and know you, and you also know them. So just getting one of these common courses, these basic courses that are for everyone. And the other good thing for me is just going to other institutes and give talks, right? Especially institutes from which I want to recruit people. So they also see you, and that some of them find your research interesting, and they write, they send you an email, right? So for me, that has worked very well.
There is a follow-up question on the chat, and the question is exactly like that. How do you prevent just hiring the same type of person over and over? How do you create a lab full of diverse personalities? Because sometimes it feels like that similar kind of skill set people are just coming and joining the lab over the time. So it gets very difficult to find the people with the diverse background. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I saw that too. That's a great point. I would say that the things that I'm selecting for initiative and for kindness, for example, those are not, I would not call that a personality trait. I would call that a behavior, right? That's the type of behavior of somebody, and their personalities, whether they're quiet or whether they're outgoing or all of that, is totally open. So intellectually, I'm very open to that, but that's a good point. How do I stop my own biases towards a certain type of person from getting in the way? I don't have a good answer for that, actually. Yeah, yeah, it's a good question.
Carlos, do you have any idea to avoid that thing?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because sometimes, and this is very funny, sometimes you can see a student and you can see how they act and how they talk and how they, you know, what's their behavior, and you can say from which lab they are from, you know, at least in here. Sometimes you see that because we tend to hire people or to make connections with people that are similar to us, right? Sure. Even in terms of personality. So this can happen, and you can get biased. So I think the best way to deal with this is just to be conscious about it, because sometimes you are not even conscious and you do it without even realizing it. And then you end up with a lab full of people that everybody can tell that they come from your lab, right? So just be conscious about it, and if they are curious if they are interested in what you do, and they have a very different personality. For example, I have a hard time with students that are very quiet or very introvert, you know. But that is not bad, and you just be conscious that, okay, is this guy really good? I'm gonna hire this guy even if it's not. It doesn't have the same personality, right? Or how you judge people, you know, like just be conscious about it.
Sure, you want to add anything? How to avoid hiring same type of people?
In terms of skill sets, I think like based on the application materials and also like what kind of academic background they have, you can get some sense that, for example, you want to hire like the people with complementary skill sets. And then that's something like, I think initially it's like relatively easier comparing with the personality parts, because it's difficult to tell just by a couple of like interviews to really know the personalities. And also like, I think even the people with like different personalities, like you can create like the environments being like welcoming and like hope people to engage with the lab. I was like looking for some different like softwares and available, and maybe just using, for example, like someone mentioned in the chat, our lab is also using the Slack. I think that if you can deploy the softwares properly, they can really be a very useful tool for get students engaged, even with like different personalities. Yeah.
Sorry for so many follow-up questions. Luis, you can go for the next one.
No, it's okay. So now that we started talking about, you know, people and the lab, so how many people you guys have in your labs, and how would you describe your lab culture, and what do you do to foster that lab culture that you're achieving or wanting to achieve? Let's start with Aman.
Yeah, supportive, collaborative environment, right? And I guess I foster that just clarity and consistency, right? You have to say what your lab is and repeat it over and over and over again. Like I'm like turning into a dad. It's like say the same thing over and over. It's like a 2-minute conversation can save you 2 months of work, which is true, right? So I try to just communication is going to be key, and anytime there's an opportunity, like I'll say, well, did you ask your lab members about that? No, why not? There's a whole bunch of smart people that are willing to put their brain against this. Why wouldn't you do that? And then, you know, you do that a couple of times and you sort of realize, this is how we do things here. And it just comes down to me saying what we're doing and then repeating it over and over again, right? If it doesn't start from me, it's not going to go anywhere, right? It's all from the top down, I think. And then making sure that you hire somebody who believes in that ethos as well, right? That's a major part of it. I know I've mentioned that already. But yeah, I would say a lab culture is going to develop. If you put human beings in a room together, a culture is going to develop. So the question is, do you want to have a hand in that or not, right? I mean, yeah, incredibly important.
Yeah. Shweta?
Yeah, so because I just started my lab last year, so currently I only have 3 undergrads and 1 graduate student in the lab, and it's a relatively small group. But then what I strive to achieve is really a supportive and inclusive environments. And then the culture is mainly built on open communications, mutual respect, and also the shared goals. So I always have weekly meetings with the individual lab members, trying to really talk with them and then to reinforce the lab cultures. And also I encourage the lab members to share for example, experimental results and really collaborate on projects whenever possible. Yeah, I think that what Aman says, the supportive and the collaborative environment is a key.
Right, Carlos.
Yeah, for me also the goal is just to create a supportive environment so that everybody feels comfortable working in. And ideally what you want is that people help each other, right? That you go through the lab and you see people helping each other. Like if an experiment didn't work, they feel confident enough to go to the other person and ask for help, and the other person will provide that help, right? So how do you achieve that? I think it's useful when you hire someone, you read the set of expectations that you have, from them and for the lab. So I always tell them, look, you have to do, we expect you to do this and this and this, and to be collaborative and to be supportive with other people in the lab. And sometimes you cannot avoid to get people that doesn't like each other very well, right? Or there is some conflict or whatever. But sometimes you will get into these issues, and I think for me it's very important to address this really quickly, before it comes into something bigger. So that's also something that I think is very important, just to be perceptive on when these situations start to appear, and then just to address them very quickly before they grow. Yeah, I think that's the advice I have on this matter.
Yeah, to be fair, that's conflict is so hard. You're right, but to be fair, right? If you're going to be leading that lab, you have to really listen to everything. Yeah, which is very hard.
We're actually getting a lot of questions in the chat, so I'll jump into some question in the chat, and I'll kind of summarize the first question asked by Kelly Allen. So the question is about how did you establish your independence or approach conversation with your mentor regarding what work you could take with you? So I can see there are 2 ways, for example, when you transition from postdoc to our own lab, we have to decide, okay, this makes part this is the part I'm going to take, so I'm not going to compete with my previous boss. At the same time, when someone work with you, they also probably take something with them. So how do you actually decide, okay, what is the part you will give it to someone or you will take with you? Can we start with you, Aman?
Oh, you just have to have the conversation. It is not nice. This goes back to the conflict thing, because that could be a difficult conversation. Yes. But I think it's something to be really clear about. And this is the type of stuff that I'm interested in and where I would like to go. What do you think? And usually a good advisor, will support you. I mean, the best advisors see you as legacy, and they would like to have a broad, successful group of people that were trained by them. In an ideal world, that's what you would have, right? And if the advisor is not like that, if it is going to be competitive, that's tough, right? And there you need to talk to basically other mentors about how to do it. But it all starts with the conversation. This is the type of thing I'm interested in, which means that you do need to have an idea of what you're actually interested in, right? Where do you want to go? And what are the big ideas that you want to take forward, so that when you approach them, you can have, they have all the information that they need to make that decision too.
How about you, Sho? What is your advice on that?
Yeah, I think have an open communication is a key. So I think just discuss what's the directions you would like to go, and with the mentees and mentors as well. And then so the open communication, as I mentioned, I think the communication and open communication is the key.
How about your Carlos, about taking which part should go with you, and same for your mentee as well? How would you decide that?
Yeah, that's tough. I think the only thing I could add is have that conversation as soon as possible, right? It's hard to have an idea from the beginning of what your lab is going to be like or what research line you will want to take with you. But as soon as you have an idea, just have that conversation with your supervisor, right? Because then you will have time to adjust. If he says, you know, you cannot take this, then you cannot adjust. You still have time, right? But if you wait to have that conversation until the very end of the postdoc, when you are already looking for positions, then it's very hard to adjust, you know. So do it as soon as possible. And then from my side, I tried, like, as long as they don't want to do exactly the same thing I'm doing or they were doing during their postdoc, is fine. You know, if they want to keep doing exactly the same thing, then it's a problem not only for me, but I think also for them. Like, they should be able to be creative and to develop into something new, you know.
Right.
I would also add to have those conversations later too, to keep having them with that postdoc advisor. Because, you know, me and my postdoc advisor, I do separate stuff, but there is some overlap between it. And so it's nice to chit chat with her and show her what we have and say, this is what we're thinking, you know, and then make sure that there's no sort of, that you guys can work together on that as well. So to have it early and often, indeed.
Yeah. And I think something that is helpful as well is start thinking on your supervisor as a collaborator, as a potential collaborator as well, you know. That's also something helpful, like getting to this mindset.
Yeah, great. I think we have time for one more question, and then we can wrap this up. So besides the standard lab notebook, how do you keep the transfer of knowledge and, you know, reproducible methods in your lab? You know, at some point people start transitioning off to new positions, but how do you make sure everyone stays on the same page and everything, all the results coming from your lab are, you know, standard for your lab? Let's start with Shred.
Yeah, I think setting up the lab norm will be like very important. And one of like essential thing in this lab norm will be the expectations and how to like setting the guidelines for the data management. And then so in the lab, we usually we use the Dropbox, and then each individual lab members has their own folder. And then for each individual, like every set of experiments, you need to have like clear record for what you've done. Why did you do the experiments, and the clear protocol you used. So, and then the result recording, you need to make sure you have like everything recorded properly. And so it will be easy to track back for you, how you did the experiments.
All right, Carlos.
Yeah, I think just tell them what are your expectations in terms of how they organize the information, right? I also have I also have a folder for everyone in the lab, and then as soon as they get results, I put everything in that folder, and I can check if the results are going well or if they are detailed enough, like protocols, for example. And then if they are not, I can go and talk to them about it. But I always try to tell them that the more detail they put into describing their protocols and their experiments, the better, right? There's not such thing as too much detail for me in terms of protocols and experiments. And that's hard because some students they do it, and some students they don't, right? So you just have to go through their notes constantly or their folders and see if there's something like really bad that they are missing, and then just try to correct that.
Yeah. And then I tell them, like, yeah, but all of this is not wasted time. This will go in your thesis. Go with the method section.
Right.
So, yeah, it's hard though. I mean, losing that skill set is tough. It's always nice if you know someone's leaving and someone's coming in to have that overlap, to have the kind of skill transfer if possible. It's not always possible, but that would be ideal. having centralized protocols that everybody can access, box all this, everything everybody says, that's what we do as well. Yeah, the best case scenario is to bring in somebody new, overlapping somebody else, and have that skill set transfer, you know.
All right, thank you guys. I think it's time we wrap up this conversation. So if you have any last words or anything you want to put out, please go ahead. Carlos, anything else to add?
Yeah, maybe I start. Like I think we talk a lot about the challenges that we face, and I think for some people hearing us, it may sound like it's a terrible job.
Yeah,
because we only talk about all the challenges, right, and all the things that are difficult. But I just want to say that it's also incredibly rewarding. Like the more effort. Sometimes the more effort you put into something, then the more reward you get, you know? And when you see, like for me before, it was really exciting to go into the lab and do an experiment and then see something new that nobody else described, right? So that was like really the key of the whole experience. And I think that was the best that you can get from science. But now as a supervisor, when you have students coming into your office, like really excited that they found something new, and then you see that they actually start to feel that they are getting results, and they understand their project, and they are really, really excited about it, then I think that's even a bigger satisfaction, you know? So that for me, balances any bad thing or any difficulties that you face when you are a PI. So it's worth it.
All right. Well, if you guys don't have anything else to add, I think we can wrap up this conversation. It's been great. Thank you very much for participating, and well, in the name of the CSS group, yeah, I really want to thank you guys for this. I'm pretty sure everyone learned a lot of new things today, because I certainly did. So yeah, please remember, guys, to follow the NAASC social media. We also have a new shiny Reddit community that you can use for asking questions or networking, or maybe just hang out and show pictures of your plants, whatever you have. Yeah, stay tuned for coming events, and have a great week. Thank you all for being here, participating.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
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 Bye-bye.